Well, after Democrats gave up a ton of seats in last week's elections to the Republicans, Republicans have responded by handing Democrats a ginormous political gift. Democrats being Democrats, however, no one yet knows if they will accept the gift. Congressional Republicans this weekend laid to rest any ambiguity about what they are coming to Washington to do, at least what they are coming to Washington to do first.
Tax rates,
taxes, tax cuts, tax increases, taxes,
and tax cut. Prevent a huge tax increase, taxes.
So unspin this for a second. I know you've heard a lot about this, but the fight here is really about one very, very specific thing. The fight that the Republicans are picking first, the first thing they want to do after this election in Washington is add $700 billion to the deficit. There are two competing proposals from the Democrats and Republicans on the issue of taxes. Both parties want tax cuts on the first $250,000 of income that a person earns in a year. Any income above the first $250,000, Democrats say that should go back to being taxed at the same rate that it was during the Clinton administration. Republicans want to give tax cuts for that income over $250,000 a year as well. What does that cost us as a country to give tax cuts on income over $250,000 a year? It is estimated to cost us $700 billion. In other words, Republicans' first action upon coming to Washington, D.C. after this election is to make the deficit $700 billion worse in order to cut taxes on only the richest people in the country. We knew this was the difference in policy proposals between the parties before the election. But now that Republicans won control of one house of Congress, this is really what they say they want to do first. Lard up the deficit. Rich people need some change of their own. If you were a Democratic shaman inventing an issue to define the Democratic Party versus the Republicans after this election in particular, after this election motivated by the bad economy and fueled by people worrying about their economic standing and all this populist lip service paid to fiscal conservatism, right? This is the issue that you would invent. Here's an issue on which Democrats want to be fiscally conservative and Republicans want to be fiscally profligate in order to help the richest people in the country. Bingo! When President Clinton got his own midterm shellacking in 1994, when Republicans took control of both houses of Congress 2 years into President Clinton's first term, a big part of that president's political resurrection was another political gift given in the same spirit as the one Republicans are today offering to Democrats. Back then, Republicans went after Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security. It was Republicans' desire to dismantle those social safety net programs that caused the infamous shutdown of the federal government in 1995. Speaker Newt Gingrich threatened to bring the federal government to a halt unless he got his way on those cuts. And then President Clinton responded, in effect, make my day. This is an issue on which I would love for you to make yourself famous. When people think about less health care, Clinton told Gingrich, in essence, I want them to think of you. When they think about a less secure retirement, I want them to think of you. When they think of the bad old days of impoverished senior citizens, I want two names to come to mind, Gingrich and Newt, and not in that order. And when they think of me, he said, in effect, at the time, I want them to think of the guy who stood up to Newt Gingrich on this stuff. So do it. I dare you. And Newt Gingrich fell for it, and he shut down the government, only to find himself ridiculed on the cover of newspapers and by colleagues who made a point of carrying those newspapers around with them on Capitol Hill. He was even made Man of the Year, and not in a good way, lit in a reddish hue with an accompanying article about his soaring unpopularity and his hubris. The thing you most want to do after a Cowboys versus Packers-esque rout is define yourself. Define yourself as a party. Define your party and define the opposition party in a way that aligns your interest, your preferences, your sense of what's right and what's wrong with where the vast majority of the country stands. You want to define the other side you are standing up against as, sure, unified and determined, but also dead wrong. In order for this to work, though, the thing is, you have got to stand up against that other side in order to collect that political gift, in order to reap that political benefit. Joining us now to understand the real difference, the real policy difference between these two things the parties are offering right now is J.J. Ramberg. She's host of MSNBC's Your Business, and she is an expert explainer of complicated things about money. J.J., thank you for joining us.
Thank you. We'll see if I'm an expert explainer.
Well, I
we'll
think
try.
you are. I mean, you host the only show I know of that is dedicated to the singular issue of stuff that faces small businesses. Republicans are trying to brand their tax proposal as fighting to cut taxes for small businesses. They say Democrats want to raise raise taxes on small businesses. How do small businesses even factor in here?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in some ways, they're kind of being used as a pawn to get this issue away from, are we just taxing the rich? What Republicans are saying is, if we do not extend these Bush tax cuts to those people in the highest income bracket, then what's going to happen is small businesses are affected. They say that half of all business income, 50% of all small business income will be affected by that. That's a big, scary number, right? 50%. And as a result, these small businesses, because they're going to be paying more in taxes, aren't going to be hiring people. And so as a result of not extending these Bush tax cuts, we're going to be slowing job growth in this country. A good argument, right?
Right.
Except it's not entirely true.
Well, it's not true.
I mean, and before I go into this, let me say both sides are also using these numbers to their benefit. But the problem is, all of these numbers are taken by a report from the Congressional Joint Tax Committee. And in these numbers are not just small businesses, what you and I would think of, the internet startup or the dry cleaner down the street. It also includes a hedge fund investor and a guy who's a partner in a law firm that's already only 3 people. And so if they're taxed at a higher rate, well, it's not going to slow job growth because they weren't hiring anyone in the first place. So it really has no effect on job growth.
And that's it seems particularly important when they talk about the businesses being affected by tax cuts for wealthy people or for high incomes being 50% of small business income. That makes sense if some of these small businesses are hedge fund guys.
Well, exactly. Right. And that's why the number gets so big. But let's go to the other side now. So the Democrats are saying, look, it's only 3% of small businesses that are going to be affected by this. And that comes from that same report. That's a little bit misleading also, because though it is a small number, and frankly it's probably less than 3% for that reason that we just discussed, the number of small businesses that actually account for most of the job growth in this country that are attributed to small business is a very small number of small businesses. So it stands to reason, if you're making more than $250,000, you're the guy who has the wherewithal to sign leases and buy equipment and do all the kinds of things you need to do to actually hire new employees.
So we don't know that there's a correlation between the richest small businesses and job hiring, but we could guess that there might be if somebody could document it.
I think it's not as scary as 50% of all business income, and it's not as insignificant as 3%, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I love that this is the first fight that we're fighting about. J.J. Ramberg, host of Your Business, 7:30 Eastern here on MSNBC on Sunday mornings. Thank you so much. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Great to see you.
So beyond policy, in terms of the political impact here, the only way Democrats can take advantage of this political gift Republicans are handing them is if the electorate believes Democrats aren't just being more fiscally conservative on this issue than Republicans. They're doing it because they have the interests of the middle class at heart, that the White House really does have a pro-middle class agenda, that they're not waging war on the rich, it's that they stand for the middle class, and for standing for the middle class in a responsible way. Joining us now, in many ways, the face of those efforts for this White House, Elizabeth Warren, Assistant to the President and Special Advisor to the Secretary of the Treasury, now tasked with setting up the new Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Professor Warren, thank you so much for being here.
It's good to be here.
Republicans coming to Washington have their sights on you. Several already saying they want the agency you're helping setting up dismantled before it even launches. How does the mission of consumer financial protection fit into this idea of an agenda for the middle class?
You know, I have to say I'm really surprised by this move. Following the Great Depression, it took 50 years before anyone started chipping seriously away at the new reforms that had been put in place to protect us. Now here we're coming out of, we hope coming out of another great recession. We've passed serious reform. And it's just a matter of months until people are talking about how to undercut this new consumer financial protection agency. You know, this new agency has not yet drawn breath, and yet there are those who are saying, let's do what we can to weaken it, to make sure that it's never able to have any effect, to be an effective voice on behalf of middle-class families.
In terms of the middle-class agenda of this White House, the middle-class agenda that Democrats hope to present to try to regain their majority in the House, to try to make up for some of the election gains that they suffered, and to try to do what they want for the country, consumer financial protection is one of these things that has been defined by its enemies as an extra layer of regulation, as an extra layer of bureaucracy that will hamstring businesses and therefore hamstring job growth. What's your take on that argument?
Well, so let's just be clear. That argument didn't win. The Consumer Financial Protection Agency became law not because there was some special interest group pushing for it or some lobbyists. Remember, the Wall Street lobbyists said they would kill it before it was ever born. They lost, and they lost because this is an agency that really is there for middle-class families. Let me give you an example of that. This agency is about being able to tell in advance what the price of a credit product is, how much risk is associated with it, and being able to make comparisons. So you could look at a credit card, for example, tell what it costs, tell how risky it is, and compare 4 credit cards and tell which one is the cheapest. Now, American families think that's a pretty good deal. Recent poll says 96% of American families say we need to get rid of the fine print in these financial contracts. 96%. That's Democrats, Republicans, independents, libertarians, vegetarians, everybody. This is not a partisan issue. This is a core middle class issue. American families have been hit hard. Flat wages, rising core expenses, they've turned to debt. Debt has turned out to be very dangerous. It has really torn a hole in the bottom of the economic boat for millions of middle class families. What this agency is about repairing that boat. And families are with us on this.
You have been studying the economics of the middle class, of American middle earners for the last 30 years. What's going to make the biggest difference on the return of a middle class? You talk about stagnating wages. You talk about the parasitic effect of predatory debt marketers, and these other issues. But in the big picture, what is going to make a difference about the return of the middle class? Is it ultimately going to be something that happens through the tax structures? What can be done?
I think they're going to be, look, let's face it, there are a lot of pieces that are broken, and as a result, it's going to take a lot of things to start fixing it. We're going to have to work on the wage side. We can't live with stagnant wages for the next 30 years for American workers. Rising core expenses really matter here. This is what's pushed families into debt. Rising expenses for housing, rising expenses for health care. Those have been really tough on American middle class. But here's one we can fix, and we can start fixing right now. And that is that families turn to debt. They turn to debt to deal with medical bills. They turn to debt to pay for college. They turn to debt to make it from here to the end of the month. And that debt turned out to be really dangerous. And it has put lots of middle-class families, millions of middle-class families, over the edge financially. This is an agency that can say that problem we can fix, and we can start fixing it now. And it doesn't take tax money to do that. What it takes is leveling the playing field and saying, look, we just want some basic fairness here. The pricing has to be clear up front. The risk has to be clear up front. And it has to be easy up front to make comparisons among products. That means getting rid of fine print. That means no more tricks and traps in the game. When that happens, more money stays in the pockets of American families, and less of it drains out to the financial institutions that have become so powerful.
Elizabeth Warren, Assistant to the President and Special Advisor to the Secretary of the Treasury on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, demonstrating tonight why she is both of those things, and one of our nation's most eloquent voices on these very, 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 very central issues. Thanks for being here. Good luck, ma'am.
Thank you.